And it's my great pleasure now to introduce Frans Timmermans. As I said, I'll take my banjo and go back to my seat. And he will, of course, also put this into much broader perspective. Thank you very much. Nice that you are here. Frans, the stage is yours.
I didn't bring my guitar, I'm sorry. And by the way, I probably look more like C6 Steve than Mick Jagger, don't I? But anyway, thank you very much, Professor Paul, for inviting me to speak to you today. Thank you very much for inviting me back to, which is now my university, since you have given me the great honor of giving me an honorary doctorate a couple of years ago. For those of you who don't know, I was actually born in this city. And when I was born here, this building wasn't here. When I was born here, this university wasn't here. It was a brilliant idea in the mind of Schenk Tans and a couple of other people, but it didn't exist yet. When I was born here, this city was very poor, very self-contained, very self-righteous in a way. And if you wanted to have a bit of excitement, or you wanted to buy some decent stuff, you would go to the city where I live, Heerlen, because that was the only place where you had decent shops, and which at the time was one of the richest cities of the Netherlands. I think it always ranked number 2. My father in those years worked here for the military police, the Marechaussee, in the city. What was his job? His job was going after smugglers who would smuggle coffee into Germany or cigarettes from Belgium into the Netherlands. I say this especially to the students. This was the Europe when I was born. This was Europe at the time. Everywhere borders, everywhere smugglers. And when he wasn't going after smugglers, what he did was, on his motorbike, escort military convoys to the borders between Western and Eastern Germany, because we were in the middle of the Cold War. It's not that long ago, but it seems like an eternity ago. If things can change so radically in a few years, they can change again also in the future. This region at the time was very rich because of coal mining. And the end of coal mining led to a fundamental transformation, which affected especially this city, which sometimes leads to a bit of bitterness in the actual coal mining region, because, you know, they were sort of destroyed, but Maastricht was rebuilt. And the question then is, at what level can you organize solidarity even in a region like this? And I've always been amazed by the fact that it's been so difficult over the last 50 years in a region that is so small to create this feeling of a collective responsibility for the future. So imagine what happens if you have the same challenges on a global scale. I remember when I was a student myself in ancient times, just after the dinosaurs, in 1985, I think it was, I was studying in France. It was 84, I think. Studying in France, and we had a discussion with international students about German reunification, and a French officer stood up. He was part of the discussion, and he said, Europe's going to be in huge trouble once there will be German reunification. And all the Germans present, some diplomats, but especially students, got up and said, it is science fiction. German reunification will never happen. It is unimaginable. 5 years before German reunification. When I worked a couple of years later as a young diplomat in the embassy in Moscow, and I wanted to report back to the Netherlands, so somewhere in the middle of 1991, September, October, having spoken to everyone, I wanted to report back there is a real risk of a disintegration of the Soviet Union. The report was never sent because all the people who thought they knew what they were talking about were of one opinion: completely unimaginable that the Soviet Union would fall apart. Incidentally, 6 months later, these same people would write everywhere, It was, of course, completely unavoidable that the Soviet Union would fall apart. I'm making this point not to look back, but I'm making this point because we are living in times of breakneck speed of change. The fourth industrial revolution we're living in is the most intrusive industrial revolution humankind has ever known. It affects every single human being on the planet. There's no way you can hide from it, you can escape from it. And the question is, how are we going to come out on the other side? Arguably, never the way we predicted. Those people who made plans to reconstruct the mining area in Limburg thought they were reconstructing the mining area. They did reconstruct, not exactly the mining area, but it had huge positive effects on other parts of Limburg. And sometimes it had unintended negative effects which needed to be corrected. That is in the nature of human beings and of politics, that you not always have the effects you intend, but still can have positive effects. The answer to this incredible change, which is the fourth industrial revolution, which is a technological revolution, it's a revolution in terms of reaching the limits of the Earth's capacity to carry humankind and having to answer that question. The only thing internationally we have going for ourselves to sort of try and put this in a framework are the Sustainable Development Goals. Are they perfect? No, they're not. But they're the best thing we've got going for us, globally, at the European level. But before I come to that, I want to raise three challenges with you that I believe also challenge universities in general and also this university in particular. As you can see across Europe, in this time of relatively good economic growth, we're doing actually quite well, and that's what the European Commission is saying all the time if you look at the growth figures. Why then is it so easy to captivate a substantial part of the European population on the basis of an agenda of fear? Why is it so easy to set some Europeans against other Europeans? Why is this happening to us now? I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I think this is a question also universities should be asking itself and should be studying very precisely. I want to give some elements of answers. In my lifetime, and I've spoken about it before, twice the incomes of people have doubled. But since the early 1990s, this has not happened. In fact, average incomes of average people have not increased. The economy is doing perfectly well. Some people are profiting tremendously of this. But this is not trickling down into society. This is not being shared in a way it was shared in the 1960s and even until the 1980s. So what's happening there? Am I right in assuming that a lot of the anxiety upon which fear politics is based comes from the socio-economic security people are experiencing and saying, yes, people are telling them, well, look at economic growth, look at what's happening, wealth accumulation. But what does it mean for me? What have I got? What's my stake in this? You know, ordinary people as taxpayers are still paying off the huge effects of the banking crisis. And the bankers who are at the origin of that banking crisis are doing extremely well, thank you very much. Again, there is an inherent feeling of injustice of this system. And the feeling of injustice in the economic system is something that warrants an answer. And so, why I think it is unthinkable that we would continue to use the argument of globalization to say to people, yes, the economy is growing, yes, the richest people on earth are getting richer and richer, but sorry, you're not, because your productivity just doesn't warrant that. Sorry, you don't have a stake in that. That is the feeling, and I raise this with you because we need answers to that challenge. I believe an agenda of redistribution, which is going to be a global agenda, not a local and regional agenda, is an agenda that should be fostered and should be supported by academia in its intellectual and economic analysis. The vessel for this social contract has always been the nation state. But given the level of globalization, the nation state can no longer do this on its own. We will need the European Union for this. We will need global governance for this. And in that context, the SDGs will be of extreme importance to make sure it is done in a justified way. So that's the first issue, and I'll leave it at for a moment, come to the second issue, and come back to the three issues at the end. The second issue is our struggle with diversity. The way our social contract is formulated, the way our structures stemming from the 19th century have been functioning to sort of underpin this social contract, has always started from a principle of mononational, if you want, monoethnic or monocultural society. And this principle in Europe has never been challenged in an intellectual way or a political way. It is not something we have digested. The coming of diversity is something that has just sort of happened to us. And we did not prepare society for it. We did not digest it. We did not give society means to handle this. And this has been exacerbated now with the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which in fact has eliminated distances. So the fact that we are diverse societies, not having been digested, now leads to an allergic reaction saying we don't want diverse societies. And I think academia, politicians, should speak up and say, we have a diverse society. The way you organize that diverse society is a matter of political choice. Creating the illusion that you could undo a diverse society amounts to the same thing as saying that you can unscramble a scrambled egg. You can try, makes a mess of your kitchen, and you're left without an egg at the end. You can try to fight diversity, but you will also only create confrontation in society, strife. And look what's happening across Europe. I, as someone who feels profoundly linked to European history, certainly coming from this region, am profoundly, profoundly disturbed by the images I've seen in Chemnitz over the last couple of days. And it is not by vilifying the people who fear diversity that we will solve this. It is not by portraying ourselves as people who have digested diversity. It's quite comfortable for people in our socioeconomic position to do that. Much less so for people who fear for their socioeconomic future and see diversity as yet another attack on their position and the position of their children. So the way we will handle diversity, and we will give answers to that issue, is the second element for creating a social contract post-Fourth Industrial Revolution. And academia will have to play an active role in finding some of the answers in that context. The third issue is technology. The world of communications has changed radically. Professor Paul referred to fake news. We all make our own news these days. Everybody is a journalist in the sense that everybody records and shares. And I see my own, especially the two youngest kids, their source of continuous information is not a newspaper, is not a news program, it's YouTube and other social media. So again, the traditional reaction of politicians and also the European Union and others, when we see that this is distorting, disturbing, creating anxiety, creating confrontation, let's regulate. To some extent, regulation will be needed. Don't get me wrong. But to a large extent, rethinking, integrating technology into the new ways of communicating in what I would call a post-paternalistic society is also a challenge for academia. How can we integrate in our lives the reality of social media, the reality of modern technology, in a way that does not create platforms for creating strife in society, for spreading lies, for reviving a virus that is sadly present in all human beings, and that is the virus of xenophobia, of fear for the other, of discrimination. So I would see these three areas as prime areas of attention. Why am I saying this in the framework of the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals? these Sustainable Development Goals can only be implemented if there is enough societal consensus to support them, because they warrant huge changes in the way we are organized, in the way our economy should develop. Moving from present-day economy to a sustainable economy is a huge process. And like any industrial revolution, some stand to lose, others stand to win. But how you organize this in an equitable way is a challenge for society as a whole. And this can no longer just be done by the nation state. And if we do no longer agree about our fundamental values, then everything will fail. You know, for some time, until quite recently, after the Second World War, after this, twice Europe tried collective suicide. And coming out of that, we redefined our values. We redefined our governance based on three principles: the rule of law, respect for human rights, and democracy. And these principles are interlinked, and one cannot overrule the other. Because only through the rule of law can we make sure that democracy does not become the dictatorship of the majority. Only through respect for human rights can we prevent that the rule of law can also be used against individuals and human rights. Our form of democracy, which we tend to call liberal democracy, is based on the principle of individual rights, regardless of your ethnicity, regardless of your religion, your gender, etc. What we see now across Europe is redefining democracy as something that is based on collective rights defined by ethnicity, nationality, belonging. And if we go down that path, then perhaps the nation state can survive for some time. But the European Union, ladies and gentlemen, cannot survive democracy based on nationalism, on exclusion, on defining rights in terms of ethnicities or nationalities. Then we lose the concept of individual rights. This takes me back to Russia, and I'll end on that. I was there when chaos was huge, beginning of the 90s. And people were completely lost. And they started equating democracy with theft and corruption and thuggery, and the market economy with hyperinflation, theft, and thuggery. So a proposition was made to them, implicitly, not even explicitly, later explicitly. I will give you stability, I will give you security, but you give me your freedoms. You can't have both. And the Russian people embraced this idea. And I, having lived there, I could understand them. The chaos was overwhelming. The insecurity was killing. Everything people had saved for the whole lives disappeared overnight in hyperinflation. And somebody came and said, I'll give you security, but you give me your liberty. It's a Faustian deal that is now being proposed not just in Russia, but in some Western European countries as well. And I believe that it is the responsibility of everyone, every institution. And don't be complacent. If institutions are being challenged, universities will also be challenged. I think it is the biggest necessity our society has today is the necessity of what the Germans call Zivilcourage. And I believe this can come out of universities more than anywhere else, where you bring together more experienced people, to be very kind to you and to me, and young people. The next generation will determine our fate. The next generation is no longer ideological, but it's very idealistic. This idealism should be the building blocks of our society of the future. But let's make sure that this idealism is based on a true understanding of individual rights, of a true understanding of democracy, of a true understanding of the rule of law and the need for independent institutions, especially the judiciary, on a true understanding for what it means to be European, what it means to be free. There is no sustainable protection or security in illiberal democracy. There is no honesty in illiberal democracy. It fosters corruption like nothing else. So what we are fighting for is a basic idea of an open society based on individual rights, founded in democracy, based on the rule of law. That is the only context within which the SDGs can be a success. That is the only context within which a new social contract, based on the two principles of caring and sharing, principles that people can subscribe to, the majority of society, that can make society work in the future. We need to mobilize the people for that. There's a huge silent majority out there that doesn't see yet what is at stake. But the time is now. The time is yours, young students. The time is yours to use to the benefit of society as a whole. Thank you very much.